Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to ScholarScoop. I'm your host, Steve Loflin, and today we're diving into one of the most talked about topics around, artificial intelligence. You know, it feels like everywhere we look right now, AI is transforming how we work, learn, and even communicate. Whether you're in high school, college, or taking those first big steps into your career, what does AI really mean for your journey ahead? Today, I'm thrilled to have my longtime friend Anne Balduzzi join us. Anne is a true pioneer in the world of AI who's been ahead of the curve and seeing around technological corners for decades. We're diving deep into how artificial intelligence is transforming education, career paths, and the way students, and probably everyone, should be thinking about their futures. Anne's also not just talking theory here. She's been at the forefront of tech innovation since the early days of AOL and Apple, and she's got incredible insights about how high school, college students, and young alumni can leverage AI to create amazing opportunities. So whether you're excited, curious, or even a bit nervous about the AI-powered future, stick around. Anne's here to show us how to turn uncertainty into an advantage. So buckle up and get ready for some serious scholar scoop. And thank you so much for taking some time to join us here.
Great. Thanks for having me. Now I'm really excited about this topic. I've been speaking about the future of AI for over 20 years, and somebody recently pointed out that my name starts with an A and ends with an I, so maybe it was just by design that I'm in this area.
I 100% know that you're telling the truth because I was thinking about this. I think we probably met each
Yeah.
other like, I don't know, 12 or 15 years ago,
Yeah,
when Susan Jones introduced us to each other.
that's
And I
right.
think the introduction happened because of our mutual admiration for Florida State being alumni of FSU. But through that introduction, I think it's been exciting and terribly amazing for me to learn so much from you. It will be really exciting for me to hear and for others to join in on, because you see actually what has emerged, and I see that you can clearly see ways of where it's going. And so why don't we just sort of start a little bit from the beginning? I feel like you're one of the people that I've gotten to know that has been anchored in technology for a very long time. Like, you were involved with some of the pioneering startups of technology, including AOL and then at Apple. And what was that like for you a lot of years ago in these pioneering companies and industries?
Yeah, well, my first job out of college, and this was really due to a random coincidence of meeting people, that I was introduced to a startup company that was very well funded because it was a startup between AT&T and what was then known as Knight Ridder newspapers, which own a lot of the major newspapers around the country, and of course everybody recognizes the name AT&T. And they saw the future of the internet. They knew that online services were coming, and they were about a decade ahead of their time, maybe even more than a decade. But it was a great opportunity to join this literally bleeding edge tech company in pioneering all of the things that we see on the internet today. And then from there, Steve Case hired me to be one of the first people at AOL. It wasn't even called AOL yet. Back in that time, it was called Quantum Computer Services. And there were only a few dozen employees then. And then from there, we signed a joint venture with Apple. And I ended up becoming a product manager at Apple, designing and developing Apple's first online service. And by virtue of the fact of working and living in Silicon Valley, I was initially exposed to AI. And the idea of it just fascinated me. In fact, Apple put out their vision of the future in a little known YouTube video called, if you go on YouTube and you type in Apple Knowledge Navigator, you'll see this very grainy video of what in the late 1980s Apple thought the future of AI would be. And they did get some things right. I mean, they got AI agents right. So you got to give them credit for that.
And how many years ago was that?
That was like the late 80s. Yeah.
Wow. So you think about that in the late 80s, there was already a lot of things starting to steer us in the direction where we're heading right now. And I think that's how it works with a lot of these very innovative technologies. They come onto the scene seemingly like out of nowhere, but they've
Mm-hmm.
actually been in development for a very long time before they make it to the mainstream. And so it must feel good for you to have been a part of it then and see where it's heading now.
Yes, and by virtue of the fact of being in the Valley, I was had an opportunity to network with some of the people that have, since grown into some of the great minds in the area of AI. And just listening to them brainstorm about the future helped me better brainstorm about where things were moving into the future. And then I ended up moving on and creating my own consulting firm where I was consulting to a lot of bleeding edge tech and biotech companies, even investing in some of those companies and helping mentor, startup entrepreneurs. Then I went on to take a little more active role in helping underserved entrepreneurs in that space. And then that gave me the courage to launch and build my own startup company. So did that over a decade ago and got a patent in data match analysis. So it really showed me back then, though, the importance of machine learning, which is one of the backbones of AI, and data. It's an incredible, you would be surprised at how many insights can be detected through data.
Yeah, and I think now data seems to be pretty much prominent in most conversations when people are trying to make decisions about where to take things or how to do things differently. It's like, what story does the data tell us? How do we make decisions around the data? And
Yeah.
so I do think that that's clearly a big part of how a lot of things get accomplished these days.
Every individual is building their own unique data file, that some of it's unfortunately, being captured by other organizations and people are being preyed on because of it. But that data is really what's going to put you on a career path, because a lot of the future, job interviews or even review of your resume could potentially be done by an AI. And it's going to be looking at that data in your resume, your accomplishments, what you've achieved, what kind of courses you've taken. All of that will add up in the long run.
Well, I think that's a really good point to kind of take it to where we are in the moment and what's happening with AI. And as you know, I work a lot with high achieving students. And so we're always trying to help our students have the best advantages for the types of things that are going to help them on their either path from high school to college or how they get from college to their career. And so with AI becoming so prevalent right now, what are you seeing, or what's your perspective on, first of all, let's start with high school. Like when you're thinking about a student in high school and they're thinking about, do I go to college? How do I make a college decision? How do I make a major decision? Those types of things. What are some key factors about AI that can be helpful in that process or that they should be mindful of when they're making these big decisions for their life?
I mean, college is an experience in and of itself. So college goes, I think, even beyond the boundaries of just education, because you're really learning, how to interact with other students. You're getting exposed to multiple different disciplines. It may not be your major, but you're getting exposed to your friends' majors along the way, and you're building sort of a social environment around yourself as well, and developing your social skills. So the college environment actually has a lot more to add than just the education component. But there are a lot of education components that, frankly, you could learn online. But if you're going, applying to and getting into the right schools, you're likely able to interact with college professors who are on, maybe doing some research in these areas, maybe interfacing with corporations that are doing some of the advanced, technologies or research, or just simply implementing, AI in unique and different ways. And that's a great way to get exposed to those, where that path could take your career.
So if you think about a student who's in high school, what's been your experience, or do you have any perspective like on getting like an internship or a mentorship or something starting in high school? Because you hear a lot about it in college, but are there some advantages for high school students from your experience in trying to identify people that can help them think about these things?
Absolutely. Think if you have an opportunity and can get an internship, I mean, it's certainly going to look good on your application for any college,
Hmm.
especially if you get it in an area that if you know early enough what you want to do later in life. And by the way, make sure you check that job will be still around later in life. For
Right.
example, if your heart is really set on becoming a radiologist, probably not a good career path, because AI is doing a lot of research in that area. There'll still be radiologists, but there'll just be fewer of them. So it'll be more competitive.
Yeah,
But
I want to talk about that in just a
yeah,
minute too, because I know there's a
yeah,
lot of shifting sands around majors and potential future opportunities because of AI. So we'll get to
yeah.
that in a second for sure.
Yeah, but that's the kind of stuff you want to forecast for yourself, and if you can figure out what that forecast looks like and then draw it back to an internship that's applicable, those are the kind of internships you'd want to look for, and or internships that can build different skills that you can utilize later in life.
And I think this is related to college students based on the work that they're doing in the classroom, but we'll kind of tie it into the high school conversation before we totally jump into college. There's a lot of bubbling up discussions right now about how AI is being used to help with things like college applications and helping, students pull things together and make it more presentable. What's your take on how students use AI to help them get work done and some of maybe the integrity issues that go along with that? That seems like that's an emerging area that doesn't quite have a clear path forward. I might be wrong, but that's how it feels to me.
Yeah, there's unfortunately a disconnect between the teaching side of things and the student side of things. And
Hmm.
if you're a now if you're a student that's using AI just to make your life easier so you can be lazy and sit on the couch and play games more or do something else more,
Yeah.
it's not benefiting you. But if you're using AI to do the mundane routine kinds of activities so that you can be more strategic or elevate your work, profile or whatever you're, creating, then that's a good use case for AI. But the teachers are always going to think you're cheating, because you're using AI, or at least that's the mindset today. I think that's evolving though, because I think teachers are starting to recognize this is a tool, just like a calculator was a tool,
Yep.
just like the internet was a tool. So, we, no longer do you necessarily have to go to a library and look up a fact when you could get that fact off the internet. And so there was a point in time, for those of you for us older folks, where there was the same disconnect existed. The same disconnect existed, even earlier for the people when calculators came along. So it's
Right.
just a matter of this happening over and over again, and eventually things will catch up and balance out.
Well, I know on college campuses, there's a lot of software programs that faculty or professors can use to put papers and things through that. I think Turnitin might be one where it kind of tells you if it's actually anything that plagiarized or if the sources are referenced and that type of thing. Is there anything with ChatGPT or other AI resources that can let someone know that it was not sort of originally written, that it came through a program like that?
Um, I'm sure they will develop sophisticated tools in that area, but if you're really good at writing a prompt and you've trained the AI to write in your style of writing,
Hmm.
it really, honestly, it would be hard to detect.
A lot to kind of digest there
Yeah.
because I think that's the beauty of these programs is they get so familiar with you as you use it over time
Hmm.
that it really does start bringing you information in ways that you would write it or the way that you would actually pursue it. And it's odd to think maybe in the ways you think about it, not
Right.
really knowing how it gets in your head. But that's what's so incredible and I think powerful about how these technologies are going to really change things moving into the future.
And one interesting way of using it is there's a number of chatbots out there,
Hmm.
and using AI in a more conversational format, so that it's not necessarily writing for you, but you're using it as somebody to bounce ideas off of, to brainstorm with. And so that's giving you sort of like an instant tutor to help you
Hmm.
in crafting your paper. And then you are very much writing it from your kind of, you're actually creating the words and putting them together. But it's based off a conversation that you were able to have with an AI.
And is there a way to instruct it, like not to save whatever it's doing for you, or does all that stuff just get cumulatively put into some place and it kind
Yeah,
of is there forever?
so the large language models are very hungry for data. And we talked about
Hmm.
data a little bit earlier, but they're hungry for data in all different ways, shapes, and forms. So they are going to be collecting that data mostly to train themselves to improve their services, things of that nature. But If you can afford to be in an enterprise environment, and there's two enterprise environments I'm aware of, if you pay $30 a month, you can get Copilot, and that gives you some protections. It's even HIPAA protected.
Okay.
And then there's also an area of ChatGPT that you can get on. It takes at least two people, though, to get on it. And that's roughly, if you pay for the full year, it's like $24 a month. And that there's a ChatGPT Teams. It's a little confusing because they use the word Teams, but that is one of their enterprise editions. So that information would be protected.
Okay. Well, I think more and more you hear people wanting to be protected somehow. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if it's generational, though. I feel like when I talk to a lot of college students, especially, I don't feel like their heightened concern around security is at the level of like my friends and colleagues that always seem to be ranting about something that they're worried about in terms of privacy. And so, I don't know if generationally we're currently in a group of students who just are so integrated into all of that that they don't see any like space between themselves and their privacy. I don't know. I could
Yeah.
be wrong about that, but it just seems a little different the way that it's a concern aspect.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
there are real concerns behind that. Like if you're pretty prevalent out in social media, um,
Hmm.
the latest scams are actually able to capture your even just a few seconds of your voice and call your parents and act like you're in trouble when you're really not in trouble. And
Hmm.
it's going to be trying to scam them for money. So I highly recommend, this is a bit of a sidebar public service announcement, but get together with your parents and your family and create, and by the way, when you create this passcode or passphrase, do it in your backyard, do it, leave your phones, walk away
Yeah.
from your Alexa devices, come up
Right.
with that passphrase, and that way your parents will feel a little more assured when they get that phone call. They're going to go, well, what's the passcode? And if that AI doesn't know it, then it's pretty clear that it's not really you.
I think that's advice that can save a lot of people a lot of
Mm-hmm.
heartache and potentially a lot of resources that they would have to claw back or try to.
Right.
And I have heard this happening more and more. And I guess to the point that you just shared, I hadn't thought about the ways that these scamsters are using AI to get the voice piece so that you actually do
Mm-hmm.
think you're hearing from somebody that's in your family. So that's really good advice and definitely something we want to remind everyone to take and do something about that while they're in high school, once they go to college, especially. Because I know when students get to college, if they go away to college, oftentimes their parents are maybe not as much as they're telling their student, but they're very concerned every day about how their student is doing. So
Yeah.
any of those phone calls that come out of left field really raise up a lot of scary red flags. So thanks for that
Yeah.
good insight. Well, speaking of going to college, now that the high school student has found themselves actually applying and getting accepted and landing at a great college experience, I am 1,000% on board with your perspective about college is a lot more than just what happens in the classroom. So while there's a lot of things happening around majors and other things, the social experience and the impact of meeting people and learning from different people outside the classroom is just a big part of that package deal. So it's not just the classroom. But I also know in higher ed, there's a lot of angst about how AI is kind of upending some of the long-term majors
Mm-hmm.
and colleges and universities that are becoming more strapped for cash and resources and also competing more for students are trying to make some big decisions about departments that are possibly on their way to irrelevance or other things. So in your kind of work that you've been doing, are there some of those majors? You mentioned radiology a few minutes ago, but are there other majors that you feel like are pretty ripe to be disrupted by some of the AI technology advancements?
Yeah, I mean, AI is currently being embedded into just almost every career path. But
Hmm.
some of those career paths, as it gets embedded into them, it actually has the capability of doing that entire job role, which means that job role is going to have to shift and change. So
Hmm.
titles and what people do, in fact, some of the latest thinking on it is that will be less about a job description and more about the skills and the type of work that we are capable of doing, because we're going to have to wear lots of different hats and be able to shift through all the changes that are going to be ahead of us. So building a capability to be really resilient to change and being sort of embracing change as it happens to you is a great skill set to have. So knowing how to adapt and evolve and go with the flow as these things change and shift directions if you have to. You don't have to. You might have decided on a career path, but if you see that, because we may not have the crystal ball that tells us, yeah, in 5 years that's not going to exist, or in 10 years it's not going to exist. At some point, all these majors are going to have a major impact, behind them.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to just be building your skills so that you have the ability to shift and change as things move. It's really good to have creative problem solving skills. It's really good to have analytical skills. Critical thinking skills are really
Mm-hmm.
strongly needed, especially to avoid the scams that are going to be coming through all
Right,
of
right.
this. But
Yeah.
businesses need people to recognize those, things as well. And there'll be a generation of people that are simply not, going to adopt AI, and that's going to open up a lot of jobs. The latest job findings, by the way, the World Economic Forum did a really nice kind of jobs report, and on it, they have actually, in the near future, more jobs being created. Not a whole lot more, but as the jobs kind of, some jobs come down, there'll be new jobs created.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have to be sort of thinking towards the future, and what I like to say, become an exponential thinker, where you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking way ahead, because we're going to be on this exponential growth curve. So we have to, the next 5 years could feel like the next 50 years to some
Mm-hmm.
people, and how you have to really be, quick at adapting and evolving through that. But data is going to be behind everything. So understanding how data works, understanding, the flow of data, and no matter what career path you pick, that's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
key element, and just having that baseline understanding of it, as well as AI ethics. You want to have a strong, ethics understanding when it comes to AI, because that's going to be a big conversation topic. And then, get used to working with AI agents and
Mm-hmm.
robots.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that is much more prevalent now just on websites when you're asking for more information. Most of the time, you're now kind of dialoguing with some AI
Yep.
chatbot, I think. That's how it feels to me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yep.
just probably going to get more prevalent and probably more better at what they deliver back to you over time so that the human person doesn't actually have to be responding. That's the
And,
goal,
and
right?
and by the way, you don't have to be a tech person to create an AI agent or even a chatbot. So if you happen to be a high school out there and are interested in playing around, there's free tools to do that, and that might be a nice thing to put on your resume.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's great for probably high school, college, even young alumni to really get more familiar with that because it's that way with most things. I think you have to dive into it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of learn how it works to appreciate the potential and then figure out what it means for you if you want to be more involved with it. But part of your answer, though, earlier makes me think of something that's probably at the core of who you are as an entrepreneur, right? You are one of these people that has that unique ability to kind of see the future or want to be a part of creating the future and thinking about it in those terms. I know working with a lot of college students, there's not a lot of them oftentimes that have any interest in being a creator or being that they want to go to college, get a degree, and then get a job that makes that investment in college, having been worthwhile. And so I think about that a lot too, in the sense that, a lot of people aren't necessarily wanting to be thinking that far into the future or trying to figure it out. And I think that's where colleges are going to have to step up a little bit and help
Mm-hmm.
the students they admit kind of understand what their future could look like or the potential is for their future. And I don't know if I see that happening very much. Does that make sense to you, or is
It,
that something you haven't thought
yeah.
about?
And honestly, when I exited college, I had no interest in being an entrepreneur. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until I was exposed to other entrepreneurs and and then had an idea that I felt was worthy of building a company around. So it took me a long time to get to that and to develop the courage to go off and do it, and the the financial stability to even do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
But the good news is nowadays you can actually start or launch a startup very affordably, because the AI agents and all the free services that you can combine together to build a new business. And if you happen to go into something like physics or material science or biotech or some area where you might be in a position to invent something, it's
Hmm.
really good to know what the patent process looks like. And just learning that entrepreneurship steps and skills, it's going to cultivate more creative problem solving. It's going to build your resilience and adaptability. It's going to strengthen your leadership and ability to collaborate with others. It's going to instill some financial and resource fluency so that you can understand how to manipulate that. And it's going to give you kind of a little more initiative in life, and it'll maybe turn you into a lifelong learner, because we all, by the way, need to become lifelong learners. So college is not the end of your learning journey, by the way. Because
Right.
of AI, we're all going to be lifelong learners. And that's
Yeah.
a habit you want to develop early. But that next big idea could come from any discipline in any
Hmm.
major. And so if you want to have those skills to be able to, embrace that idea, if you happen to stumble across it, and if you don't stumble across anything, just going down that entrepreneurship track is going to teach you how to pitch an idea better. So, because you're always going to be in some position or situation where you're either pitching the idea for you to get a raise or
Yeah.
you're
Right.
pitching the idea for a new, something, new that you want your company to do, or a new direction they want to take. So that having the confidence in knowing how to put together a really strong communication that in the form of like pitch, which is what entrepreneurs do. They're always pitching their ideas. That's just a great skill set to learn. So I highly recommend every student, no matter
Mhm.
what you're majoring in, to take an entrepreneurship class.
Well, I think one of the biggest changes that I've noticed having gone to college a long time ago is there weren't actually entrepreneur classes back when I was in college. It was
Mm-hmm.
more geared toward the business standards, right? Marketing, which I was a marketing major undergrad, or, accounting or finance. But now entrepreneurship is certainly emerging to be a part of a lot of college of businesses at a lot of universities. And I do think you're right. If a student who maybe is even on the liberal arts side of things would consider taking a entrepreneur class, you could see where you could meld those things sometimes, because a lot of entrepreneurs that I've gotten to know always say they love hiring liberal arts majors because they kind of learn how to think when they're in college, and they kind of learn how to dissect things in ways that if someone wants to be an entrepreneur when they get to college, they're usually always chasing the next big thing. And so there's a lot to be said for that. So I think the more that advice could get out there to students, take an entrepreneur class. You don't have to major in
Mm-hmm.
it, but just get
Right.
get some exposure to it. Um,
Yeah.
I always think about it in terms of like everything that any of us experience in life always started out as an idea first,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, a product, or, having this conversation, someone had the idea to do something and they followed it through to the point that other people get to take advantage and benefit from it. And I think it's just something that people should embrace a little bit more, because you never know where your ideas can take you. So
Right.
I think that's a really good point, that we should all be encouraging people to think about that regardless of your major.
Yeah, and eventually through life, we all stumble across a passion. And we may not
Hmm.
have that passion today, or the passion could shift and change. But when you find that passion that you are so committed to that you just want to work on that all day long, yeah,
Yep.
that's a sign. It's time to kind of go off and start a business in that area.
Well, and that's, I think, how you create your fulfilling life, right? Is
Yep.
that you give yourself permission to explore those things. And you just have to really think about it from the angle like, well, this is my life experience to create. And what do I want to
Hmm.
do with that in terms of making it a reality? And and I know we've seen this, a lot of ideas turn out to be hugely successful in all kinds of ways beyond what was imaginable. Other ideas don't quite make it to the light of day, but it doesn't mean you don't learn things in either one of those situations. Even if you bring a company to, into the world, it may not always turn out to be what you hoped for, but everything that you can learn through that is a good part of your life experience. That's at least how
Yeah.
I try to frame it up.
Yeah. Actually, failure, I've learned far more from my failures than from my successes. Yeah.
Wow,
And I
I
think
don't
that's
think,
a,
have you ever had a failure, Anne? Have you really
yeah,
ever had a failure?
yeah, yeah. But I've heard that said before by other entrepreneurs, and it's something that probably isn't studied enough because
Yeah.
a failure is actually a really great way to learn. And it's some of the investors I've met over the years like to invest in startup founders that have had failures because
Mhm.
it's those failures that they know they won't make again.
Yeah, I think people do have a
Mhm.
tendency to beat themselves up too much when something
Mhm.
doesn't work out as they were intending. But I think a failure is just really a teachable moment, right? What did you learn from this that you can actually go and do something else and not repeat the same thing or, take it in another direction?
Yep.
But you're right. I don't think we give enough people permission to fail because I've thought about this before in like a lot of companies that do like evaluations around jobs, right? When you have that job evaluation, a lot of employees dread those conversations. And partially because the conversations revolve around the things that the employee's failing at or not doing very well. And I think the common sense approach to that is like, well, they shouldn't be doing those things, right? That's if they're failing at that, it's not in their wheelhouse or unique ability. You should let people perform in the things that they're really good at. And I think we have to think about it in those terms too, because sometimes the failure comes because we're not actually supporting people to the level of letting them do the things that they love to do, and not forcing them to do things that's not in their capability zone. But
Mhm.
that's a hard thing for some companies to try to, I think, address. It's just easier to go for the things you're not getting done, right?
Right. But even companies these days, when they go down this AI path, they're
Hmm.
piloting something new. So when everything, they're to make sure it does work, they're doing it as a pilot first. So think of different aspects of your career as being sort of a partial pilot, of your own
Right.
career path, if you want to, call it that, or as you try something new out, or grow a skill set. Even if you failed, it was a pilot, you gave it a shot,
Yep.
and now you're, kind of bringing it back and reconfiguring it to get it right the next time.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, I think if you're going to do something, and I think everyone should, that you're passionate about, you oftentimes have to do a lot of things to figure out what it is that you're passionate about. You can't be passionate about something that you've never gotten yourself in the middle of to kind of
Mhm.
understand it and realize it. And so I think there's a tendency sometimes to be like, oh, I don't know what I'm passionate about, or I wasn't born with a passion, or whatever it is. But it's like you only become passionate about things that you get invested in and you figure it out. I like that. I don't like that. Um, and once the things that you like materialize, then hey, that's what you should probably pursue a little bit more.
Mhm.
But it's definitely something to think about. Well, I know we don't have a ton of time, and one of the things that I'm really curious about, because I talk a lot to college student parents or high school student parents that are helping their student think about college. A lot of parents oftentimes measure their success as a parent based on their students' interest in going to college, or they feel it's their number one goal is to get their student into college. What do you think is good advice for parents of college students about, making those decisions? Are we at a point where maybe college isn't 1000% necessary for some students, because of what their passion might be? Or how do they redefine how to be helpful to their student and making plans for the college experience?
Yeah, you certainly don't want to be paying for your student to go to be trained by somebody who's not up to speed on the latest, technologies or the latest aspects of even that topic. So if you're finding yourself in a teaching environment where you're not learning, and you're learning more maybe off YouTube videos than what you're learning in the classroom, you definitely want to, kind of think that through and maybe even point it out to the university because they don't want to do that either. They want to improve. And maybe
Right.
there's another professor or another person who does have the greater level of experience that you can shift over to. But that's sort of, you need to manage that process. But if you're going down a career path that really colleges haven't adapted to yet, then maybe it's, that's something that you try to educate yourself on. I will say that there are certain career paths where you're going to get farther if you do have a master's or even a doctorate degree. It's going to up your income, down that road, depending upon which path you go. So if you're going into, astrophysics, you're going to be better recognized if you've got a PhD or, a master's degree in some area. If you're going into biology, then probably the same is true. Medicine, obviously, law, certainly. But if you're going down other paths, it might not be as necessary.
Yeah, I think a lot of times students, when they do start off as a first-year student, they don't always think about what has to happen next in order for me to get where I want to go. So I do think in some cases it's going to become more important for students to think about graduate school or professional school to actually maximize their opportunity. So it's probably good to start thinking about that depending on whatever that major might be. The other thing that I was going to ask before we kind of wind down is, I know we had dinner recently and you were just kind of rolling through a lot of these great AI tools that are currently out there, probably emerging every day as a new one, I'm not sure, but I know you mentioned a little while back Copilot as like a suggestion, or ChatGPT, which is probably the most universally known. But if you're a college student, what would be any of these AI resources that you might recommend?
So I would get actually well versed in as many as possible. So I wouldn't focus all your time just on one. I mean, OpenAI's ChatGPT, which I think the latest version is like 4.5 or oh 04, that is, definitely, one of the strongest ones out there. But there's also Google Gemini that's really strong. There's also Claude, which is really strong. And each one of these, by the way, and there's, by the way, dozens and dozens of them, but each one has its own kind of areas of excellence versus others. Although they're really starting to balance out. The other thing, there's also Meta's Llama 4, which is an open source model. And if you're really good at this, you could go in and create your own custom model, which would be a really cool thing to do. And then you also have Perplexity, which is being really, a lot of people are using Perplexity over things like Google because you can go do a search. And Perplexity has free deep research as an option. You only get so many shots at it a day, but it will give you like at PhD level thinking on a subject matter.
Okay.
You can get that through ChatGPT as well. They have a deep research. The icon is like a little telescope icon. I'm not sure if it's only on the paid or the free versions, but all of the multi-level reasoning and deep research or deep thinking tools that's where the future of AI is moving. That's where you're going to get your best results. And these tools are also multimodal. So you can use it for text, you can use audio, images, video, and search. Some of these models, by the way, will let you share your screen. Now, this is a security thing you got to think about too. But if you're sharing your screen, if you're working on a software project or something, and you don't know how to use that particular software program, you can share your screen and say, "Hey, how do I use Photoshop? How do I do this?" And it'll actually walk you through the steps to achieve what you're trying to achieve on that screen. So that's a cool tip. Another one that I really like is Notebook LM for learning. When I need to learn something quickly, you can go, and this is through Google Notebook LM, by the way. You can upload either a YouTube video, a PDF document, a web link, and then it will create a podcast, or it'll create notes or whatever you're looking for. It generates a lot of different things. Even a mind map, I think, is one of the newer things it can generate. And it's just a great study tool. So you can give it a really, thick document, have it turn it into a podcast, and then you just listen to it and absorb it. So that's I think a nice kind of way of interacting with these tools. And by the way, that there are more and more, they keep exploding every day. And there are websites out there that all they do is vet these tools as they come out. And then there are influencers on YouTube that are really particularly good at kind of highlighting the latest tools. So, find the people that you like or the kinds of areas. If you're really into music, there are people who specialize in that. If you're really into creating graphics and images, which, by the way, people are creating videos that are almost as good as you can. Pretty soon, by the time I'd say by maybe the end of this year or next, you can create a whole movie using AI without having a movie studio. So if you happen to be a creative person, you can get your script and your movie created all by yourself. I'm waiting
Yeah.
for the first person to win an Academy Award who's done that. So I see that happening in the next few years. But this is all the kinds of things that you can play around with, experiment. There's free tokens, free trials, free periods of time that you can try it, or they just happen to be free in general. So take advantage. Oh, there's also a great chatbot called Sesame, sesame.com. That's just if you want to just really talk to there's two, I forget, Maya's the female, and then there's a male one too, and you can talk to either one of them, and they'll remember the conversation when you come back. ChatGPT does that too.
Well, I think right there, you just unloaded a boatload of resources that will be tremendously helpful for so many high school, college, and even alumni and their families as they look to utilizing AI. And I hope that you feel terribly redeemed in all of your belief in AI from so long ago, watching it all come into fruition. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today and giving us some good ScholarScoop. And as fast as everything is moving, we'll have to have you back again soon, and we can see what has evolved because it's moving pretty fast from what I can tell.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've met many of your scholars through the years, and I feel confident that the future is in their hands and it's taking us in the right direction. So, best of luck to
Thank you.
all.
Thank you for that. And thanks so much for being here.
Great.